I once believed that endings announce themselves. A dimming light, a door closing someone, clearing their throat before delivering the sentence that would split your days in two. But now I know they can arrive without ceremony, without a shadow or warning. Sometimes they arrive in the middle of a kitchen, between the sound of water in a vase and the hum of an old refrigerator. I was arranging sunflower stems slick under my fingers, their heads leaning toward the same imagined sun. Evan had always liked them, said they looked like they belonged to people who didn't mind being looked at. The vase was clear glass, one of those grocery store kinds with a faint seam down the middle. Something I'd had for years without remembering where it came from. The phone rang, just twice at first. I wiped my hand on a dish towel that had long since lost its brightness. The ring on my finger slid as the fabric caught it, thin gold worn to a pale brass, the engraving inside smoothed almost flat. I picked up the phone. Alma, her voice was flat. No rise, no falter. Yes, it's done. Evan's gone. We held the service this morning. You don't need to come. There was no room in the words for me to step into them. No place to ask what she meant or why my son's service could take place without me. The line clicked. She was gone before I could even find a sound to give her. I stayed there, the phone pressed to my ear. The vase shifted as my elbow brushed it and a sunflower tipped forward. The head brushed my wrist almost politely before falling to the tile. The sound was softer than I would have expected. I looked down. The stem had bent near its base, a pale crease where the green skin had split just enough to fold. I knew from habit that trimming it might help it drink again, but some things never straighten once bent. The kitchen clock ticked in the next room, one notch at a time, each second as small and ordinary as the last. I set the receiver on the counter beside a ring of water left by the vase. My fingertips lingered on the plastic still warm from my grip. It felt like holding the ghost of something that had been alive only a moment ago. Yesterday I had written stable in the corner of the calendar, under the date marked with a star. The surgeon's voice had been calm, rehearsed. There's time, he'd told me. I had written it in dull pencil pressing, just hard enough for the letters to leave an indentation I could feel if I ran my finger over it. The refrigerator clicked on and hummed. The air smelled faintly of coffee from the mug by the sink, a brown ring dried to the bottom. I'd been meaning to scrub it, but the stain had become familiar, like a mark in a house you stop seeing until someone else points it out. I lifted the fallen flower. Its head was heavy seeds beginning to form in the center. The petals scratched slightly against my palm. I slid it back into the vase between the others. The water moved in small ripples, nudging the other stems aside to make room. I thought about driving to the hospital anyway, about walking past the reception desk, ignoring the way people look when they're deciding whether to stop you. But her sentence played again, exactly as it had come. You don't need to come. The words fit together too neatly, like something she'd practiced. The dish towel was still in my hand. A faded blue stripe ran along its edge, the fabric worn thin enough to see the weave. I folded it without thinking, smoothing the corners as if that would make it whole again. My eyes found the corner of the counter where the laminate had chipped a small triangle missing. I'd caught my sweater there once years ago. Evan had been home for a weekend, standing right where I stood now. He'd laughed when the thread snagged, told me I kept the place together with pins and willpower. I remembered his voice then, but not the last time I'd heard it. It had been weeks, maybe months. I had kept messages short to match his. I had told myself we were both busy, that silence was not absence. The phone sat where I'd placed it, a quiet rectangular weight in the middle of the counter. The cord curled loosely toward the wall, making no sound. Somewhere beyond the closed windows, a car passed. The engine faded before I could place it. I turned the ring on my finger the way you do when you're not thinking about it until it found the spot where it had always rested. It left a pale circle of skin when I slipped it off. I set it beside the vase, the gold dull under the kitchen light. It didn't shine the way it used to, but I knew its weight exactly. The flowers leaned together in the vase, their faces turned away from me now. I imagined them in the hospital room, their color catching in the white light, their stems in a glass of water by his bed. I'd planned to bring them after lunch, maybe with a book or the crossword folded in my bag. The clock ticked again. I didn't look at it. A drawer stuck halfway when I tried to open it. It had done that for years, swelling in the damp and shrinking in the dry. Inside were envelope scissors, a pen with teeth marks near the cap. I closed it without taking anything out. I thought of the last card I had mailed to him, a postcard with a sketch of the town square bought from the pharmacy where the pens always leaked. I'd written only a line thinking of you. Let's talk soon. It hadn't been returned, but I never heard from him after that. The air in the kitchen felt still, as though the room itself were holding its breath. I brushed the water ring on the counter with my fingertips. It spread slightly, leaving my skin damp. I rubbed it against my palm until it disappeared, though the counter was still cool where it had been. The calendar page was turned halfway, the corner dog-eared from being flipped back and forth. Next month's squares were empty, waiting for things that would not happen. The words on the phone still hummed in my mind, low and even. No explanation, no space for questions. I stood there, one hand on the counter, the other resting on the edge of the vase. The stems inside pressed faintly against the glass, shifting slightly as the water settled again. I left the phone where it was. I used to think that if I kept myself small enough, I could fit into any space someone left for me. The kitchen chair across from mine still had the faint dent in its cushion from when Evan sat there years ago peeling the label from a bottle while I poured him coffee. I traced that indentation with my eyes, now the fabric darker, where it had been pressed and released over time. There had been rules. I had agreed to them, though no one had called them that. Just call first, she'd told me once, holding the edge of the door as if it might close on its own. I'd nodded. I called before I stopped by every time. Most days, the answer was the same. He's busy. No explanation beyond that. The words left no purchase for me to hold. The calendar I kept on the wall still had neat blue ink on certain squares, birthdays, anniversaries, weekends I'd planned to visit. A thin line ran through most of them. My handwriting in pencil reschedule. Some had nothing at all, the absence more abrupt than any mark. One Thanksgiving, I set the table for one. The turkey breast had cooked unevenly. I'd sliced the better half for a plate I never served. My phone had lit up with a message as I sat down. "We've got a full table here. Enjoy your evening." The knife had rested against my plate while I read it twice. The candle I'd lit stayed burning for hours after I finished eating. I never brought it up with Evan. When he did call, the conversation was quick about things with no edges. Weather, work, groceries. I learned to make the calls shorter myself. If I matched his brevity, I told myself maybe he'd feel less crowded. Once, when I suggested meeting for lunch, she answered for him. He doesn't have the energy for that right now. I had been holding my coat ready to put it on. I hung it back in the closet, the sleeve brushing against the others like it had never left. I kept gifts simple. A book I thought he'd like. A jar of the jam he grew up eating. More often than not, I handed them to her at the door. She would take them without opening the bag. They're fine without this sort of thing. The door behind her always looked like it had just been painted. No scratches near the handle, no signs of wear. I told myself not to take it personally. That's what people say when they mean swallow it quietly. My neighbor once asked if I'd be visiting my son that weekend. I'd told her I wasn't sure. It was easier than explaining that I always knew the answer before I asked. The old answering machine in the hallway had kept some of his messages from before. One in particular, his voice younger, lighter, still played clearly. "Mom, it's me, just checking in, call when you can." I'd never erased it, though I didn't play it often. Not anymore. There were times I thought of showing up anyway. Standing on his porch waiting for him to see me and remember. But I knew how that would go. It's not a good time. The way those words could close a day or a season. I started bringing small things for Sierra instead, a scarf, a cookbook, so it wouldn't look like I came only for him. I'd watch her accept them, her expression a smooth surface. I still sent cards for every occasion. Some came back without reply. Others, I imagined, went unopened. The handwriting on the envelopes felt too much like mine when I saw them in the trash weeks later, thrown out with grocery ads. I can't remember the last time I was in their living room. The chairs had been moved since then. The clock on the wall might have been replaced. I remember noticing the faint scent of polish, the absence of anything that looked lived in. I told myself it was a matter of time. That families have seasons, and this was one to be endured. That if I stayed quiet enough, patient enough, Evan would notice the space where I should have been. Patience becomes a habit, the same way silence does. You don't feel it take root until it's part of the floor beneath you. Once, after a particularly brief phone call, I sat at the kitchen table with a bill to pay and left the pen resting over the check. The ink bled slowly into the paper where the tip touched a small blue bloom spreading. I let it go until the paper gave way a tiny hole where there should have been a name. I thought about calling him back that night. The phone was on the counter, the cord looped in its usual curl. But the words I imagined didn't survive the air between thought and voice. I knew enough to understand that certain doors once shut don't open, because you knock louder. I stacked the cards I'd been meaning to send on the corner of the table. Birthdays. A note for no reason at all. I kept the envelope sealed, my name in the corner, the ink already drying. On the shelf above the stove, the ceramic bowl he made in high school still held loose change. Pennies mostly dull and warm from the kitchen air. I'd thought about giving it to him when they moved into their house, but it never seemed like the right time to offer something that couldn't be returned. It stayed where it was. I had followed every line they drew, even the ones I couldn't see, until I stumbled into them. I'd stepped back each time. The chair across from me sat empty now. The cushion still held its shape, but lighter than I remembered. I kept my hand on the table, fingers resting in the faint groove where the varnish had worn away. That place had been made by years of elbows leaning cups setting down. A record without words. There are rules you agree to without realizing it. And by the time you know, they've already been written in a hand that is not yours. I didn't touch the phone. I've learned that what's missing can be heavier than what remains. The birthday card came in an envelope with her neat, practiced loops on the front. Inside 2 lines, something about "Hope you're well," and a closing signed from them both. There was no space for my name, no mom, not even in the polite formality of the greeting. I turned the card over, looking for a stray note, an extra word hidden near the fold. The paper was smooth, without the impression of any other hand. It wasn't the first time. One winter, I heard through a neighbor that Evan had taken a few days off work for a cold. I called, picturing the blanket he used to keep on the couch, the one with a snagged corner from when the dog was still alive. Her voice answered, "He's fine, just resting. There's no need for you to come." It was neither warm nor sharp, just final, as if the distance had already been decided. I let her words settle where mine should have been. That December, I saw the photograph online. Their family, her parents, her brother Evan, arranged in front of a tree lit with small white bulbs. His smile was the kind that sits just on the surface. I noticed his coat. It was the one I'd given him years earlier. The collar still refused to lie flat, though in the picture it seemed almost straight, as if someone had pressed it before the camera clicked. The caption named everyone except me. There were other small subtractions. A framed photo of Evan and me taken on the day he graduated once sat on the mantel in their living room. When I visited, it was gone. In its place, a scented candle in a glass jar, the wick still unburned. The casserole dish I'd sent over after his surgery came back, washed, but without the note I'd tucked under the foil. I'd written it in pencil, soft erasable, on the back of a grocery receipt. At a gathering on her side of the family, someone I barely knew remarked almost kindly that Evan had never really had much of a family before. The sentence hovered over the table untouched. I kept my eyes on the rim of my cup, where the tea had cooled to the temperature of the room. The surface trembled slightly when I set it down. I didn't correct them. Words like that arrive fully formed, closed against revision. The mail slot in my door opens with a metallic snap that carries through the hallway. For a long time, I'd pause at the sound, listening for the weight of an envelope in his handwriting. Mostly it was bank statements, supermarket flyers, the brittle crack of charity appeals. Once, there was a printed invitation to an event of hers. My first name was there, but not my last. I placed it on the kitchen counter and let it sit for a week before sliding it into the drawer, where I keep stray buttons and keys whose locks I no longer have. There's a pair of black wool gloves in my closet, the lining slightly frayed, bought 2 winters ago when I saw the forecast drop. I'd thought of giving them to him the next time we met. They still hang from the same hook, the paper tag bent but unremoved. The last time I saw him, the hospital room smelled faintly of something freshly wiped down. The light came from above, pooling in uneven shapes on the blanket tucked too tightly around his legs. "Don't worry," he told me. "I'll be home soon." The words were steady without hesitation. I believed them. My hand stayed on the strap of my bag instead of reaching for his. It seemed unnecessary then. There would be another time. I can't picture the moment I left that room. I know I walked past the nurse's station, nodded at someone, pressed the elevator button. But the actual leaving has slipped away, as if my mind refuses to replay the steps that led out without him. Now I wonder if the blanket was folded for someone else later that day, if the chair I sat in was moved to another corner, if his name was erased from the chart with a single stroke. There's a magnet shaped like a small house on my fridge, holding up an old grocery list. In the corner of that list, written faintly in pencil, is one word in his handwriting: oranges. I've never replaced the paper. The graphite has smudged where my fingers sometimes graze it, but the letters are still legible. The spaces where he should have been are harder to hold than any object he left behind. The absence is not clean. It gathers like dust in places you don't think to check until the light catches it. I think of the photograph from Christmas, the coat I chose for him, the card without my name, the gloves still waiting. None of them carry weight on their own, but together they have the gravity of something anchored deep. I still keep the gloves where they are. I always thought there would be some trace. A line in a file, a folded paper in a drawer, a name typed cleanly into a system. Something to prove a person had been here, and that you belonged to them in some way. The number for the hospital was still written on the back of an old appointment card. There was a faint brown ring in the corner, from when I'd set a mug down too close years ago. I pressed the numbers slowly, letting each click settle in my ear. There's no patient by that name in our system. The woman's voice had the smooth finish of something she'd said too many times. I spelled it again, letter by letter, my fingertip tracing the chipped edge of the counter. "Still nothing," she repeated. I let the silence sit as if waiting for her to reconsider. She didn't. Somewhere behind her, I could hear a faint shuffle of papers, a voice speaking to someone else. When the line went dead, I pulled the directory from the shelf. It fell open where the spine had cracked years ago. W section. Always the same place. My finger moved down the column until it found Westwood Memorial Chapel. A different voice answered there, lighter at first, almost careful. Yes, the service was held this morning. It was a private arrangement. That phrase, private arrangement, felt practiced, as though she'd been given those exact words to use. Who arranged it, I asked. Mrs. Sierra Whitaker. She wanted to keep the gathering's small, limit attendance. A pause, like she was checking a note. She requested no invitations be sent to family from Mr. Whitaker's mother's side. She felt it might create complicated feelings. The words fit together too neatly, like they'd been written down ahead of time. I thanked her. It felt strange to give thanks for information that closed a door. When I set the receiver down, the dial tone stayed in my ear a moment longer than it should have, like a faint echo. I sat in the nearest chair, the one with the worn armrest, where the fabric had thinned over the years. The edge was softer there, a small comfort my fingers found without thinking. In some other room earlier that morning, there had been chairs like this. People sitting with folded programs on their laps. The faint murmur of voices waiting for the music to start. A casket I would never see. I imagined her at the front speaking to the funeral director in that even tone she used when she wanted her instructions followed without question. Not even his mother. It's best this way. The refrigerator hummed on, then clicked off again. The sound was louder than it should have been. I looked at the magnet near the top corner, shaped like a bird with a chipped beak. It held an old grocery receipt. On the back, in my handwriting, was a half-finished list: sugar, tea, paper towels. Things I used to keep in the cupboard for when he came by. It wasn't only absence, it was removal. Not just forgetting, but crossing out. I thought about the black wool coat he'd worn in a Christmas photo, once the collar uneven, because he hadn't noticed. Somewhere between then and now, I had been trimmed away just as neatly, without asking if the fabric would fray. The phone sat heavy in its cradle, as if it knew it wouldn't ring for me again. On the bookshelf was a small box with a sliding lid. Inside were postcards from places he'd visited, birthday cards with his name in his own handwriting, a newspaper clipping about his graduation. Proof that once I had been included without needing permission. Now there would be a new set of photographs from this morning. Faces arranged neatly, hands clasped, eyes lowered. My place in them would not be empty. It would simply not exist. I thought of the last time I had seen him, hospital light falling across his face, his voice steady. I'll be home soon. I'd believed him. Belief is quiet. It doesn't ask for proof until it's too late. The clock on the wall marked each second with a sharp tick. I let it. Someone had decided I would not be there at the end. They had signed my absence into existence as neatly as signing a check. I stayed in the chair, my hand resting on the frayed armrest, my finger wrapped once around a loose thread. I didn't pull it. Threads once gone don't return. I turned the phone face down on the table. The screen still lit for a moment before dimming into black. It stayed there, unmoving, as if it had no more use. I had no plans to call her again. The latch on the front door clicked in a way I hadn't heard in years when I turned it and slid the deadbolt into place. The sound was final, but quiet. I closed the blinds in the living room, each slat lowering like a line drawn through the day. The rest of the afternoon passed in the small bedroom at the end of the hall, Evan's room when he was still a boy. The air in there always carried something faint, like the pages of an old book. On the dresser sat a trophy from a Little League season he never finished, its plastic batter frozen mid-swing. Next to it, a faded photograph of him holding a fishing rod twice his height. I picked up a medal from the county spelling bee, the ribbon frayed at the edges. His name was printed neatly on the back of the bronze disc. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the shallow engraving. it was still legible. From where I sat, I could see the edge of the bedspread navy with a single tear along the seam. I remembered mending it once, his small hand holding the needle in place while I threaded it. The stitch had held all these years. I stayed in that room until the shadows lengthened, pulling together the scattered pieces of the last few years. Every time I'd been told he was busy. Every time my calls had been returned hours later, or not at all. A year ago, after the chest pains that sent me to the hospital overnight, I had written his name as my emergency contact. I waited the entire morning for the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. Instead, a nurse came in with a form for me to sign. She said no one had arrived. I folded that memory into the rest, the ones that didn't fit right at the time, but I had tried to smooth over. Now they stacked together sharper at the edges. The hum of the refrigerator carried faintly into the room. I hadn't eaten since morning. The idea of food felt like it belonged to another kind of day. In the early evening, the doorbell rang once. I didn't move. After a pause, a second chime. The sound of retreating footsteps followed. Through the gap in the blinds, I caught the back of Mrs. Harlan walking down the path, a container in her hands. Later, I found the note she'd left on the porch. Thought you might need this. No signature. The handwriting was familiar from the years she'd sent Evan birthday cards, even after he was grown. I set the note on the counter without unfolding the foil on the dish. The phone lit up twice, with messages I didn't open. One from a number I didn't recognize. The other from Sierra. There's nothing more to discuss. I read it once, then let the light fade away. The next morning, I stopped by the corner store for milk. At the register, Tom, the owner, looked at me a moment longer than usual. "You've been keeping to yourself," he said. "Just busy," I replied. "You missed the service." His tone was flat, but the question was not one I could answer in any useful way. I wasn't invited. His eyes shifted to the register keys, and he didn't look up again until handing me the change. "That's unusual," he said, more to the counter than to me. I walked home with the milk in one hand, the cold seeping through the carton into my palm. By noon, I had made my decision. There would be no confrontation, no demands. Words spent on her would be like shouting into a locked room. Instead, I would start quietly. There were people who had known Evan well enough. Old teammates, a colleague from the garage where he worked before the surgery. They might have seen the spaces where I'd been shut out without realizing it. But for now, I stayed still. That evening, I opened the top drawer of the dresser in his room. Inside were folded T-shirts, their colors dulled from years of washing. One had a faint coffee ring near the hem, something I had never managed to bleach out. I pressed the fabric between my hands. The street outside grew dark. Headlights passed in thin lines across the ceiling. I thought of the last time we'd spoken face to face, nearly a year ago in the hospital hallway, when I had visited after his minor surgery. He'd told me not to worry. His voice had been light, but there was something in the way. His eyes flicked toward the door, as if measuring how long until someone else would come in. Now the stillness around me was complete. I did not fill it. I did not try to push against it. On the desk, his old school notebook lay half buried under a stack of envelopes. I opened it to the first page. His handwriting looped and tilted the way it had since grade school. A list of things he'd meant to do one summer: fix the bike, learn to play guitar, take his mother fishing again. I closed the notebook and placed it back where it had been. In the kitchen, the phone blinked once more. I let it blink. There was strength in not moving toward the noise, in not answering. I understood that now. I poured a glass of water, the sound of it filling the glass loud in the empty space. The threadbare armrest of the living room chair waited where I had left it. I sat down, curling my fingers along its edge, the fabric warm from the light that had reached it earlier. I would move when it was time, but not before. And when I did, it would be on my own terms. For now, the silence was mine. I kept the key in the small porcelain dish by the sink, the one with the chipped edge. I didn't know why I hadn't put it somewhere safer. Maybe I wanted it to be in plain sight, where I could look at it without meaning to. Dot Matthews met me at the diner on Main. She slid into the booth across from me, her winter coat still buttoned to the top. I remember seeing you in the hospital lobby once she began fingers tracing the edge of her coffee mug. You had flowers. Sierra came down, talked to you for all of 3 minutes, then you left. I always wondered why you didn't go up. I kept my eyes on the napkin holder. She said Evan needed rest, I replied. Dot leaned back. Rest's one thing, cutting you out's another. The waitress refilled my cup. I added no sugar. Do you remember when 2 years back, right after his gallbladder surgery, same look she's had ever since, like she's guarding something that isn't hers? I let her words settle without chasing them. That night, I went through the box I had brought down from the attic. It was one of those heavy banker's boxes with a broken handle. Inside were old bills, folded letters, a pair of cufflinks he'd worn only once. At the bottom, wrapped in a piece of grocery bag, was the key. Brass, with the number 314 etched into its face. The bank smelled faintly of lemon cleaner when I walked in the next morning. Patricia Young looked up from her desk. She had been at Evan's graduation, sitting 2 rows behind me. I found this, I told her, placing the key on her desk. She picked it up, turning it in her hand. Safe deposit, opened a few months before. Her voice trailed. Do you know if anyone else had access? She glanced at her screen. Only him. And the listed beneficiary. Her eyes flicked up. That's you. What happens now? If you'd like, we can arrange a time to open it together. You'll need identification. She paused, choosing her next words. No one else has been in since it was opened. That's unusual. I left the bank with the key back in my pocket. It felt heavier now. In the afternoon, I called a number I hadn't used in years. Hank Miller's voice was graveled, as if it had to travel through something rough before reaching the air. Alma Whitaker. Been a while. I need to know if you ever worked for my son. There was a pause. Yes. Evan came to me last spring. Wanted proof someone was intercepting his calls and mail. Thought it was happening when he wasn't home. And I got enough to show interference. He said he'd handle it from there. Didn't tell me who, but I had a good guess. Why didn't you call me not my place? Client's choice. His voice lowered. He didn't want you worried. I thanked him without letting my tone change. The following days blurred into each other. I still went to the grocery store, still nodded at neighbors. From the outside, nothing had shifted. Inside each conversation, each piece of paper, was a quiet stone in a growing stack. One evening, Sierra called. Her number lit the screen, steady and bright. I answered on the 3rd ring. There's been talk, she began. I'd rather you not stir things up. People need to move on. I haven't spoken to anyone. Dot has a big mouth. Dot tells the truth. She tells her version, a pause. Evan didn't like drama, you know that. He also didn't like being cut off. You're imagining things. Her words were precise, trimmed of anything that could be argued with. I ended the call before she could hear the shift in my breathing. Hank called back 2 days later. I found copies of what I gave Evan phone records, undelivered letters. He'd kept them in a file at my office, said he'd pick them up. He never did. Keep them there, I told him. You sure? Yes. For now. The key stayed in the porcelain dish. The file stayed with Hank. The questions stayed with me. Patricia phoned to confirm the appointment at the bank. Next Tuesday, 10 a.m. Bring your driver's license. I wrote the time on a scrap of paper and tucked it into the back of the phone book, between the emergency numbers and an old receipt. At the grocery store that week, I saw Sierra near the produce. She was placing apples into a bag, her nails perfectly painted. "You're holding up," she said, without looking at me. "Trying to." "Good. No need to drag anyone through the past. Evan's gone. Let's keep it clean." Her tone was the same as when she'd once told me the casserole I brought was too heavy for summer. I moved past her, leaving the aisle before she could see my hand tighten around the handle of the basket. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the small lamp on. The light fell across the porcelain dish, the key catching it just enough to shine. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. It was enough to know it was there waiting. The house was still. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock each second, the same distance from the next. I thought about the file at Hank's office, the unopened safe deposit box, the conversations that had slipped out at the edges, the things people said when they didn't think they were saying anything at all. I knew not to rush. Sierra was expecting noise confrontation proof she could point to as troublemaking. I would give her none of that. For now, I would stay as I was. The key remained in the dish. My hands stayed folded on the table. The silence did the rest. I had imagined the meeting 100 ways, but never with the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. The manila folder in my lap felt heavier than it should. Graham Porter's office smelled faintly of paper and old varnish. Sierra sat across from me, her hair perfectly arranged, her eyes fixed on the polished surface of the table. Graham adjusted his glasses, glancing between us before opening the folder. "I have the investigator's report here," he said, his voice level. "It confirms that communications between Evan and his mother were intercepted over a period of at least 2 years. He looked at Sierra. "Phone calls, mail, in-person visits all redirected or blocked." Her jaw tightened. "You make it sound malicious." "It is malicious," Graham replied. He flipped a page. "Hank Miller documented the methods used. And I also have confirmation from the bank safe deposit box number 3114. Evan listed Alma as the sole beneficiary." The words hung in the air like a held breath. Sierra's fingers, adorned with the thin gold band Evan had given her, began to tap against the arm of her chair. "You don't understand what it was like," she said. Graham's tone didn't change. "Then explain it." She leaned forward slightly, her voice lower now. "Before Evan, I was with someone else, Andrew Clark. We were serious. I thought we'd marry." Her eyes flicked toward me, then away. "His mother hated me. She decided I wasn't good enough. She lied, manipulated, convinced him I'd betray him. Eventually, he stopped returning my calls. One night, he told me he'd always choose her." Graham didn't react. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "That kind of thing stays with you," she went on. "When Evan and I married, I told myself it would be different. But I saw the way he looked at you, the way you mattered. I couldn't risk it happening again." "You decided the risk was me," I said. She nodded once. "I thought if I could keep you out of our day-to-day, there'd be no wedge. No chance for anyone to turn him away from me." "You cut me out of my son's life," I said quietly. Her voice sharpened. "I protected my marriage." Graham's pen clicked. Once a sharp sound in the stillness. "Protection isn't the word I'd use," he said. "You isolated him from his mother. And from what Hank told me, Evan was beginning to see it." At that, something shifted in her face. Her hand stilled. "He told me once that he missed you, that maybe it had gone too far. We fought about it. I told him it was either us or everything else." The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. I thought about the key in the porcelain dish, the unopened box, the file in Hank's office. All the pieces Evan had left behind now, scattered between strangers. Sierra's voice broke the quiet. I know I went too far. By the end, I didn't even know what I was trying to protect. It wasn't love anymore, it was control. Her words were precise, but her eyes didn't meet mine. Graham closed the folder. Alma has legal standing regarding Evan's estate. We can proceed formally or... He glanced at me. You two can decide on a personal resolution. I looked at her. She straightened her posture, smoothed the front of her skirt. I'm not here to fight you for money, I said. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Then what are you here for? To understand, I answered. She leaned back, crossing her arms. Understanding doesn't change what's done. No, I said. It doesn't. The clock on Graham's wall ticked. Once, twice. She shifted again, as if trying to find a position that didn't expose her. I didn't want you at the funeral because I didn't want people to talk. About tension, about family fractures. I thought I was sparing everyone the scene. You spared yourself, I replied. The muscles in her jaw tightened. Maybe. Graham folded his hands over the closed folder. If you're ready, we can discuss next steps. Sierra's gaze flickered to him, then to me. I can't undo what I did, she said, but I can give you access to what's left. His things, the accounts, whatever matters to you, her voice dropped. It won't make it right. I know that. I studied her face for a long moment, the careful makeup, the rigid posture, the way she kept her hands still now, as if movement might betray her. You'll meet Graham again next week, I said. We'll go over the details then. She nodded once. No, thank you. No apology beyond what she'd already offered. We stood. The scrape of the chairs against the floor was louder than it needed to be. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, I did love him. I looked past her toward the hallway. I know. The click of the door behind her left the air oddly lighter. Graham gathered the papers, stacking them with deliberate care. She told you more than I expected, he said. I kept my eyes on the folder. She told me enough. When I left, the late afternoon light was sharp on the pavement. I walked to my car without looking back. The folder sat on the passenger seat all the way home. I didn't open it. Not that day. That night, the key was still in its dish. I set the folder beside it, the two of them side by side, each holding what I wasn't ready to touch. I turned off the kitchen light, letting the room go dark around them. And I left it that way. I never thought a voice could lose its weight the moment it stopped defending itself. Sierra sat across from me, her fingers worrying the edge of a manila envelope, the crease growing darker as if it might split. I kept my hands folded in my lap, the old gold band on my finger pressing against bone. I didn't take it off. I wanted her to see it. You have what you came for, she murmured, her eyes fixed on the table's grain. I didn't come for anything. I answered, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Her jaw tightened. You want me gone? You've always wanted that. I let the words fall between us. The envelope shifted in her hands, its corner tapping the wood. If you want to change, this is the time, I said. She gave a small, humorless breath. Change I've lived my whole life making sure no one could do to me what was done before. I didn't ask her to explain. Graham's office earlier had given me enough Andrew Clark, Elaine Clark, the choice made without her. All of it sitting inside her like a locked drawer she couldn't stop checking. You took from me what couldn't be returned, I said. Her chin lifted. And if I told you I thought I was saving something, I touched the ring again, not to fidget, but to feel the years it carried. Saving doesn't look like erasing. She flinched barely, but enough. "What do you want me to do, Alma?" "You'll see a therapist," I replied. "Every week, for as long as it takes." Her mouth parted as if to argue, but I raised a hand slightly, not in command, but in refusal to hear what I'd already decided not to hear, and she asked. "You'll keep the house," I said. "It's stability. You'll need it." Her brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because I'm not here to take your walls apart," I told her. "Only the ones between us." She leaned back. "You think some stranger with a clipboard will fix this?" "I think you might stop building rooms no one else can enter," I said. Her lips pressed together, and for a moment she looked younger, less like the woman who had orchestrated absence, more like someone who once waited for the phone to ring and knew it wouldn't. "I don't deserve your help," she whispered. "It's not help," I corrected. "It's a condition." Silence pooled. Outside the window, a figure passed their shadow, gliding over the wall. It reminded me of hospital corridors, people moving past doors they'd never open. She glanced at the envelope again. "And the rest, the accounts, they're going into a fund," I said. "The Evan Whitaker Fund, for families like ours." "Like ours," she repeated. "Broken from the inside out," I answered. She looked away. "That's cruel." "It's accurate," I said. Her fingers stilled on the envelope. "And if I refuse," I shrugged slightly. "Then you refuse. You'd walk away." "I already did," I replied. Something in her shifted then, like the slackening of a rope after years of tension. "Fine, I'll try." "Not for me," I said. "Not for him. For you." Her laugh was short, almost bitter. "You think I can be different?" "I think you can decide," I said. The clock in the room ticked slow, even a sound that measured more than time. She stared at me for several beats, then nodded once, as if sealing something with herself rather than with me. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I don't plan to," I replied. Her eyes widened a fraction. "Then why?" "Because carrying your ruin doesn't mean I have to add to it," I said. She swallowed. "You're colder than I thought." "Colder is sometimes cleaner," I said. Her gaze drifted to my ring again, but she didn't ask about it. I didn't offer. "Will you check if I go?" she asked. "No," I said. "That's between you and the person you'll talk to, and if I fail, that's still yours," I said. Her fingers curled into her palm nails, pressing into skin. She didn't look up when she spoke again. "Evan would hate me if he knew." I didn't move. He knew enough. She exhaled slowly, the sound thinner than before. "And you're still giving me a chance. I'm giving myself one," I said. The room held itself very still. Her eyes flicked to mine, and then away the way someone might glance at a mirror they weren't ready to face. "You've changed," she said finally. "I had to," I replied. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't speak again. I waited, but not for her words only, for the shape of her silence. It was different from the silences I'd known with her before. This one didn't push me out. It kept her in. When she rose to leave, the chair legs made a low sound against the floor, like the sigh of something heavy being moved. She paused with her hand on the door. "Do you think he'd approve?" she asked without turning. I looked at the band on my finger, the small scratch near its edge. "He'd recognize the choice," I said. She nodded once and walked out. I stayed seated, my palms resting on the table, the wood faintly warm where the envelope had been. The air still held the trace of her perfume, familiar, but no longer invasive. I thought of the fund, the names, it might carry the faces I'd never meet. I thought of the rooms I'd left closed for years, and the ones I'd decided to keep locked. Some walls don't fall, they just stop being lived in. I never imagined that silence could arrive with the weight of a gift. When I opened the door, Sierra stood there with a wooden box in her hands, the kind that still carried the faint scent of polish and cedar. The brass latch caught the light, and for a moment, I thought she might simply hand it to me and leave. Instead, she stayed in the doorway, shoulders drawn, but not in the way they used to be. "I have something for you." Her voice was quiet, the kind people use in hallways outside hospital rooms. I stepped aside. She walked in and placed the box on the table. Beside it, she set down a thick envelope with my name, written in her handwriting, the one I had learned to read from birthday cards, and formal thank you notes. Her fingers hesitated on the latch. When she opened it, the hinges made a soft, reluctant sound, like the first door you open after a long winter. Inside, on a piece of dark felt, lay Evan's pocket watch, the one from his college years, with a faint dent on the side where he'd dropped it running for the bus. I remembered how he used to wind it on Sunday evenings, his thumb brushing the glass face in small circles. Beneath it, a photograph Evan at 6, hair mussed, holding a paper airplane in one hand, my arm around his shoulders. The edges were curling from years of being moved between drawers. I hadn't seen that photo in decades, but my hand knew the exact weight of the moment it had been taken. There was also a letter folded, twice the paper softened at the creases. I recognized his handwriting before I saw the name at the top. It was addressed to me. No date, no stamp, just my name. I didn't open it, not then. Sierra rested her palm on the edge of the box. "These belong to you." Her tone carried no defense, no urgency. Just a statement like returning a library book long overdue. I touched the watch but didn't lift it. The metal felt cooler than the room. She slid the envelope toward me. "And this? It's the rest. Everything that's left. The house papers are inside. I signed them back to you. I didn't reach for it." My eyes stayed on the watch, on the shallow dent, on the way the chain curved into itself. "You don't have to." She stopped. No, I should have done this a long time ago. For years I had imagined words that might come at a moment like this. Accusations, demands, explanations. But nothing seemed to fit here. Sierra's voice softened even further. "I'd like you to come to dinner. At my place. Not today, but soon." I looked at her then. Not at her clothes or her posture, but at her eyes. The tautness I had grown used to was absent. There was no scanning for threat, no shield. Just a steadiness I had not seen before. I nodded once. The first dinner happened 3 weeks later. I remember the smell of rosemary in the hallway as I stepped inside. The table was set for 2, though I knew she had cooked enough for more. She served roast chicken carrots glazed until they shone bread still warm from the oven. We talked about the weather, about the late frost that had nipped her garden, about the old oak tree in her yard that the city threatened to cut down. Evan's name didn't surface until dessert, when she mentioned how he used to steal the last piece of pie, even if it meant hiding it in the fridge behind a jar of pickles. I didn't laugh, but I didn't look away either. The dinners became a rhythm. Once a week. No fixed day. Sometimes her hair was tied back, sometimes loose. Sometimes she wore the apron Evan had given her their first Christmas together, the one with the faded red stripes. One evening as she poured tea, she spoke without looking up. "I see now that control doesn't keep anyone. It only makes them leave sooner, even if they're still in the room." I didn't answer. The steam from the tea curled between us, slow and unbroken. Another week she placed a small tin in front of me. Inside were 2 cufflinks. "He wore these at our wedding. I thought you should have them." The cufflinks were plain silver, but on the back of each was a tiny scratch where the engraving had been removed. I traced them with my thumb, wondering if Evan had ever noticed. Sometimes we ate in near silence. Other times she asked about his childhood, what games he played, how he learned to ride a bike, which foods he hated. I gave her answers in pieces, never in a rush. It was not forgiveness. It was something quieter built, one plate, one chair, one evening at a time. Spring turned to summer. The watch from the wooden box sat on my mantel, now not hidden away. The letter remained unopened, its folds softening with the weeks. I told myself I'd read it when the air felt right, though I suspected that might never come. One afternoon, after clearing the dishes, Sierra paused at the sink. "I know I can't give you back the years, but I can make sure you never have to wonder where you stand again." I thought of the years she meant, and the years before those, the ones she didn't. I thought of Evan's smile in that photograph before any of us knew the shapes our choices would take. I placed my cup on the table, aligning the handle with the edge. We didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Now every week, the seat across from mine is no longer empty. The meals are not celebrations, nor are they penance. They are simply what they are, a shared space where the past sits quietly at the table, but no longer eats first. The wooden box remains on my shelf, the latch polished from the times I've opened it. Sometimes I lift the watch and wind it just to hear the faint ticking. Not because I'm keeping time, but because it reminds me that even after being still for years, something can move again. I still haven't read the letter. I no longer measure my days by what is missing. The kettle clicked off before the first light reached the edge of the counter. I poured chamomile tea into the mug with the small chip on the rim, the one Evan had made in art class when he was 12. The glaze was uneven, the color somewhere between pale green and rainwater, but it fit my hand as if it had been made for it. The air moved through the open kitchen window, carrying the faint scent of earth after last night's rain. In the center of the table sat the wooden box, its brass latch catching the soft light. Next to it, a vase of sunflowers leaned slightly to the left as though listening. I had cut them fresh yesterday. The roses in the yard were opening early this year. Evan had planted them with me one spring, his hands covered in soil hair, falling into his eyes as he pressed the roots down. I had thought then that we would always have seasons like that. The doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Sierra stood there holding a pie wrapped in a clean kitchen towel. The steam from it reached me before her voice did. "Baked this morning." She stepped inside without waiting for me to move aside, but her presence no longer felt like intrusion. We set the pie on the table. She removed the towel and placed it over the back of a chair, smoothing the fabric twice before sitting. "Work's been busy," she began, cutting the first slice. "We had a woman come in who hasn't spoken to her sister in 20 years, left with a phone number in her pocket." Her tone was even, but I could hear the shift, the way she lingered on certain words now, as though they were heavier in her mouth. I poured tea for both of us. "Still at the center." She nodded. "They've given me more responsibility. I'm in charge of the family outreach program now. There was a time I might have asked if she felt ready. Now I just slid the sugar bowl toward her. Between bites, she mentioned her therapy sessions, not as confession, but as fact. "It's strange," she said, "realizing the story you've told yourself for years isn't the whole story." I let the words settle on the table between the pie plates. She glanced at the wooden box. "You kept it there. It belongs there." She didn't touch it. Instead, she reached for another slice of pie, her movements slower now. I told her about the last meeting of the Evan Whitaker Fund, a young father and his teenage son sitting 2 chairs apart when they arrived, leaning toward each other by the end. They stayed behind after everyone left. Just talking. Her eyes shifted toward the vase. He'd like that. The morning passed without mention of apologies or forgiveness. We spoke about her neighbor's new dog, about the city's plan to repave Main Street, about the way the price of apples had gone up this year. Small things that once would have felt like wasted time. When she stood to leave, she wrapped the remaining pie in foil and pressed it into my hands. For later. I walked her to the door. Same time next week, she hesitated, then nodded. After she left the house, held the faint warmth of cinnamon and pastry. I carried my tea into the garden. The chair under the maple tree was cool in the shade. From there, I could see the roses, the sunflowers in the kitchen window, the faint outline of the box on the table. The wind was light, carrying the rustle of petals. Somewhere, a neighbor's screen door closed with a soft clap. I thought of the years I had spent trying to prove my place in rooms where my presence was questioned in conversations, where my words were treated like excess. Those years had a weight, but they no longer pressed down. Evan's face in memory was not the boy in the photograph or the man in the watch chain's reflection. It was something less defined, but more present in the curve of the garden path, in the sound of a chair pulled up to a table. I no longer ask whether I am forgiven. The question feels smaller than the life I have now. The tea cooled in my hands. I did not drink it. A breeze passed through the roses, bending them just enough to show the pale undersides of their petals. I leaned back, letting the chair take my weight. Nothing needed to be decided in that moment. I thought of the letter still folded inside the wooden box. It would remain there. Not unread, but not read either, existing in the space between. The wind moved again, brushing the edge of the garden, and a sunflower in the kitchen window nodded once as if agreeing. I closed my eyes.